Hi, everybody. Welcome to Extra Hours. I'm not Grant. It says do not disturb too, by the way. I just told you a little do not disturb anyway. But that's but if you have things you'd like us to discuss, go ahead and throw those into Makana, and we will get to them as fast as we can. One thing I thought that would be fun to talk about from last week was that we talked a fair bit that is featuring Toad the Wet Sprocket, as well as the Bare Naked Ladies, and a lot of other folks that are sending in videos and so on and so forth that are part of this. So it's going to be a live stream that happens on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll post more probably within experiences. I would love to hear how you're using ProAV for Extra Hours and or other shows. What is the routing setup and how do you manage it? So I think I can talk to this accurately, but we're using Zoom Rooms ProAV to send via NDI. We're sending the NDI feeds to Vector in AWS. So both of those exist. The Zoom Rooms exist on one instance. The Zoom Room exists on one instance. The Vector is on another instance. There's a couple other instances out there running a couple other things. Everything from the IceCast server to the bridge and a couple other tools there. So, and all it's doing is sending NDI from again from Zoom to Vector, and then the audio is embedded into that. And so that's how we're managing those inputs in Vector. Is we just have individual ISOs for each of them. So it's pretty straightforward. And we're gonna, as we get a little further along, we're gonna probably do a second hour on that pipeline to just talk about what's working and where we're going with it. But that's what we've got so far. So hopefully, let us know, John, what your challenges have been with ProAV. Generally, we've found to be ProAV to be a really stable. So it's interesting that you're having to jiggle the handle or move things around or whatever to get it going. So let us know what those exact issues are, and we'll see what we can do. Let's jump into the next question. Is from Funsak Dorji in Dharmasala. And Funsak asks, hi, panelists, please advise on camera position and things to keep in mind while for a TED Talk live event at a school. Go ahead, Chris.
I've done a TED Talk. What do they call the little regional ones?
X.
They call
TEDx.
It's TEDx. Yeah, I did a TEDx years ago, and it's important. Me and some friends from office hours, we were watching it real carefully, and I had actually went into it, and I grabbed a sample of each frame so you could see where the. Oh, I'm sorry, my stupid thing is doing the thing. I will turn that off. But I'll sit like this.
He keeps running away from
me. Really sorry. They got their red carpet spot where they like you to stand, and there's a big TEDx logo in the corner. But look at not only the framing of shots, but also the proportion that they get used, and it'll affect the way you either call the show or cut the show.
Good, Carl.
So everything that Chris said as far as pacing, the other thing is he's saying it's live. TED generally isn't live. So they do this kind of first night of TED being live. It's not actually live. It actually goes out. So my guess if it'd be either an EVS if it's going to be close to live on the west coast of America. But most of the time it's a few hours behind. It is the same night that you will see it in the cinemas. So this is for the cinema people, but it's not usually live. There's a reason for that. So because they want to get these edits perfect, they want to make sure everything's perfect. So they want to be able to go back and do these things for the main TED conference, which happens usually in the beginning of the year. So I would strongly suggest, why are you going? If you do have to go live, then you need people. Throw people at the problem. You need a person on every camera. You don't need subject matter experts on every camera, but you need people who know what they're doing. Because once you're live, and you need comms if you're going live as well. So there's a whole comms layer, and you need people who know what they're doing. If you're not going live, then you can get away with having less people who have less experience, because it's not essentially fix it and post. But if someone's camera they don't have enough headroom or that cuts someone's head off, you can go away from that camera for a second until they fix it. But until you can tell them on comms, hey, fix that camera, and then they get back on. So that's the beauty of doing that. You can have vision switches who are very fast at noticing someone's camera's just slowly drifting down because they're not holding on to the arm. They haven't locked it off. So there's little things like that when you're live, you have to be careful of. The other thing is sound. So sound is the other one if you're going to go live, or even if you're going to record it. So if, look at the setups they have in TED Talks, which is a headset. They're using probably a Countryman or DPA. So look at those. You can use cheaper versions. Make sure the microphone's placed in the right order. You do need one subject event. So even if it's not being broadcast live, it is only one take. It's a one take wonder generally. So you want 3 people who really know what they're doing in that team. That can be you being one of those people. It doesn't have to be. If you've got the money, hire them in. If not, ask around and see who's enthusiastic. Be careful. Enthusiasm can cover up inexperience. So you need to be careful of that as well. But yeah, focus on audio as well as the video, because TED Talks are a talk. So really with the information they're giving, a lot of that is going to be what they say. And then of course you're going to have what they show on the screen if they do have any slides, which they usually do.
And then Alex, go ahead, Chris. I did find that graphic. So here it was. Basically, there's the 5 cameras, and it was a long form interview. I think this interview went on for like 2 hours, and you have a close up of the guest and then a medium shot of the guest. There's the center shot, which is an awkward shot, but interestingly, uniformly framed. Then there's the host with this sort of medium shot and the host close up. And if you look at the proportion, the majority of the show, well, I guess technically not the most used shot was the medium shot of the guest, not the close up of the guest, which was interesting. And I probably would have cut this opposite of that. I probably would have stayed closer on this, but I will say that the show was super compelling to watch, beautifully lit. And I've been really enjoying a lot of long form interviews where people we're going to take the time and we're going to hash this out, and we're not going to break away to do a AG1 commercial. Entertainment these days, that and Bering Sea Gold. I love Bering Sea Gold. But a long form interview, like, 90 minutes minimum. It slows your heart rate. Alex, you don't need to watch it in 2x speed. Just let the conversation evolve. And I'll say that this particular guest has a very interesting speech pattern, because he'll ask Chris will ask him a question, and there's an incredible long pause sometimes before he answers. And
He's not
interesting.
It up. A lot of times we tighten those things up. Like someone asks a question and you pull it out. But.
Totally get it. And my theory is a lot of these things are like politically based. And so my theory is they leave the pauses in there. One, this particular guest is not afraid to think on camera. And 2, if you're getting into like a hot button topic and there's a bunch of edits in something, well, we were just pulling it up. Well, were you? Were you just pulling it up, or did you change the content of what he or she said? And so I think part of it is a conscientious choice to leave it completely unedited. Now, that's not to say they didn't shoot it as a multicam and then cut it in post, but they're not doing the pull-ups. And I tell you, the audio on this particular one was fantastic. So the silences were deafening. It was just, there was no background noise whatsoever. It sounded like everybody was going through like a mixed pre or something like that. But it was just the deafening silence on some of those pauses.
Yeah, typically when you think about shooting these things with someone on stage, we have some kind of rule of the napkin, kind of like, this is what we're going to put in there. There's an automatic way to drop the cameras down for someone like us for a stage presentation. And that usually looks like, if you have a stage here, we have a wide shot that's going to be our master shot. That's just something we can always go to. That is the stage. And usually we have a close-up shot that's following the person, usually waist up if they're walking around. If they are willing to stand and plant, then we'll get a chest up, or head and shoulder shot. But if they start moving, this is the problem, by the way, if you're a speaker, one of the things we try to train speakers in is walk and post, walk and post, walk and post. And why we tell them that is we want them to walk while they're setting up what they're going to talk about. Anytime it matters, post. I mean, stay somewhere, stop walking, because what that camera will do is move in. If you want it to be dramatic, let a good camera operator know that you're going to stand there for a little while, by standing there. and they'll pull in to get a head and shoulder shot. And now the depth of field gets softer, and you look more important. All those things. But typically that's going to be a waist up shot because most speakers don't do that. Anyway, and then the other shots that we tend to get is we tend to have cameras come from both wings. So these are, if you're turning one way or turning another, we'll oftentimes have that, those two cameras there to grab onto those. And we'll get these as wide out as we can. And then oftentimes we put another camera here, and this camera can grab the audience, but a lot of times we put a wide lens on it and it actually grabs more like this, right? So it grabs this whole area where you're getting the person on the stage and the people in the audience. And it creates that this is the audience I'm talking to. And it sometimes if you get that in just the right place, it's a great master. It's kind of this really cool shot of them speaking out there. As Chris showed, you only use it for a small percentage of the time. You cut to it every once in a while, and you don't hang on that. You generally do it exactly kind of the model that you saw with Chris's graph. That medium shot or a wide shot of the person talking is going to be the vast majority in close-ups, but you'll use that wide shot every once in a while to show the stage. You're going to use that side shot to show them talking to the audience. And then you use those two singles to grab them whichever way they go, like if they're turned one way or another on a stage. So those are but that's kind of how we think about those is we usually I usually consider 4 a minimum for that type of show, with a 5th or 6th one as extras, in that process. Now, if you're going to have interaction with the audience, it changes a little bit in the sense that oftentimes when you're going to have interaction with the audience, we often put 2 PTZs on either side. And the reason for that is that, we don't know where they're going to ask the question. And what you don't want to do is throw from one side, all the way over to the other side if you don't have to. And so you have the 2 PTZs. The reason we use PTZs instead of operators is because the operators are a distraction to the audience. And so having the PTZs there, they just kind of blend, especially if you put them in the back and don't light them, they're going to kind of blend into the atmosphere. What's interesting is this is the one place we don't tend to use FR7s. We use FR7s for almost everything if we're going to use a PTZ, but we tend to lean towards the Panasonics for this specific outcome, or the BRC. We were using 1000s, but they've got some better ones that are doing the 20X because you can throw it in there. Now, what we do is we pre-program, depending on how big the audience is, we usually pre-program the cameras, and we'll often break this into quadrants or even sometimes smaller, depending on how wide the audience is, and pre-program the cameras so that they can fire anywhere that they need to. And oftentimes I said you don't want to crisscross, but oftentimes it actually is a crisscross where we throw here and go there because you get to see the person's face looking at you. Otherwise you get too much of a profile sometimes. But either way, we pre-program these so that they have those quadrants. And the reason for that is that the camera operator can hit a button really quickly. They see where that person's standing up. They hit that quadrant, and it immediately goes over, gets them close, and then they push into the camera, rather than otherwise you're waiting around with that PTZ camera trying to find them. And so if you establish quadrants or something more dense than, sometimes we have 8s or, whatever, you can, the problem if you do more than quadrants is you really have to remember what you're hitting. Quadrants are really easy, A, B, C, D. You just know where the quadrant is, and it's easier to grab onto, and it just gets you close. And then the operator will move through it. One of the things we'd like to do there is if you're streaming it, if we're going to take questions, we like to take questions from the online audience and the in-room audience. And the reason we do that is so that we can reset the camera for the next person. So that you always, if you have an online question coming in, you have that one, you field that one. It can be over text or whatever, but it means you get to reset the next camera. So anyway, those are some things to think about as you start to go down that path. Let's go to the next question. Lois Richter in Dallas, California said, I have used tape, VHS and U-matic to record things, iMovie on a computer and iDVD burning into discs. I want long-term storage with only a couple dozen recordings to pass the future generations. What is safe but cheap medium? Nothing fancy. Go ahead, Carl.
So there is no one answer to this, obviously. There's something called active archiving. So essentially active archiving is the medium, the physical medium you're putting it on, and the software format, the soft format of it. So let's say MPEG-4 or ProRes, these are soft formats. So you need to be careful of which you use. Now, there are large ones, like a good example would be MPEG-4. MPEG-4 is quite ubiquitous in hardware, What that means is you actually don't need software to decode it. So you can simply put MPEG-4 into an iPad or an Android tablet, and inside that tablet, in its hardware, there are hardware decoders for MPEG-4. So in 100 years, as long as that tablet is still working, we can still get power into that tablet. You don't have to worry about software being corrupted because it's actually hardware in the actual thing. So MPEG-4 is a H.264. The version of MPEG-4 is actually quite a safe one because there are so many hardware encoders around the world now that can do that. You're not at the mercy of licensing and all that kind of stuff. It can't be switched off, well, not easily anyway. So MPEG-4 would be probably the one format I would choose for if you're okay with compressed. Uncompressed, I would probably go ProRes because Apple's probably not going to go anywhere anytime soon. So ProRes is probably a safe format for a more uncompressed, higher quality format. They're the two formats I would choose. Now, as far as the physical medium you put them on, kind of tests have shown that SD cards will last the longest. People drop their cameras in the ocean, and then 2 years later, a diver goes down and finds that the camera's ruined, but the SD card, the memory on the SD card is still readable. And those, you'll hear about people getting their photos back, 2 years later from off the coast of Vancouver, for instance. I remember that was quite a famous one. That was down there for like 7 years or something. So SD card, if you really want to talk about like longevity, avoid things like any spinny drives. Obviously, spinny drives is more of an active archiving, so like a Drovo or the Synology, that's active archiving where you need someone there to change a drive when it fails. You can do that, but again, that's more active archiving. Avoid USB sticks. USB sticks can just not work sometimes, essentially because some of them are cheap. So just like a USB storage device, they can work, but they sometimes don't work. Having copies is probably a good thing to do. No matter which way you do, which way you go, you're going to have copies of this. So having USB sticks is not a problem, but have 3 different brand of USB sticks. USB-A is not going to go anywhere. A USB-C stick would be okay as well. The fact that televisions now have USB in them as well means this is where the MPEG-4 comes back around, that you can plug a USB stick into a television and that television will play it regardless of software, regardless of internet connection. So it'll just play it. This is also true for some disc players like DVD players that have a USB input as well. So this is kind of the way you're thinking, and you're kind of thinking like 20, 30, 40 years, as long as these machines can spin up. And there's no doubt that there's going to be emulators in the future that'll play older formats. But I don't think H.264, H.265 are going to be outdated in the next decade or two. Probably we have 20 years. Just like VHS got a good 20 to 30 year run. I think H.264, H.265 will have that good 20 to 30 year run on being hardware supported in devices. I'll steer clear at the moment of things like AV1. Google has moved the Mark III times. AV1's their third format, unlike Apple, which has had ProRes now for quite a kind of got away from a lot of that issues. But you still need an SD card reader, of course, to do that. Kind of, you can actually just put alligator clips on the pins and go the other way. But USB sticks, but use multiple brands and have multiple of them. Avoid spinny drives. And then if it's actually photos, print the photos. Print the photos on high quality paper or photographic paper. Now, photographic paper, you want to go to a local big box store that still does photographic prints. They still make them on photographic paper and they process them. It's digital, but they convert them. But so photographic prints, if you're going to do that, I won't suggest the same for movies. I won't tell you to put it onto celluloid. So even though that will last 100 years, I won't tell you to do that. But for videos, MPEG-4 and ProRes. And for photos, same again, JPEG, just flat JPEG. There are new versions of JPEG coming out. If you have Windows, convert it to bitmap. So humongous file, but bitmap can be read by anything at any time. You can be read by Windows 3.1. So bitmap is an interesting one. TIFF is kind of similar. So TIFF, bitmap, they're massive files, but they'll be read by anything in the future, and it can be read by anything in the past as well. So if you get a time machine. JPEG will be safe for the same reason as MPEG-4. There's hardware decryption of JPEG on many devices. But for photos, definitely print. Passing on future prints to a future generation is quite amazing. They'll be spellbound by it as well. But yeah, that's my suggestion.
Especially after the CME. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, I've just come off a fairly large project. We're archiving 400 petabytes of New Zealand's archive data. So the models that we're using are pretty standard 3-2-1, so 3 copies, 2 places, one of them off-site. So for your context, I'd look at a few copies, as Carl says, on SD cards. They're pretty robust. If you've got a family member that you're wanting to share them with, make a couple of copies. When you go visit them, drop off a copy. If you make some updates, next time you go, take another copy, bring the other one back. That way you're always rotating it and keeping the media up to date, which is always a good thing. And I'd recommend an uncompressed and a compressed format, because as Carl says, MPs, MP4s, H.264, 265 is going to be around for a long time, but you don't know how long these are going to last. They might be there for 60 or 70 years, and there might not be something around, where an uncompressed format's probably going to be able to be read. But the other thing that's really important is you've got the context on that information in your head. So who's in the videos? Where was the video that's taken? What's the context to your family?
Demo here. This is my archive of drives, and there's a few hundred drives in here. The oldest one that I have on site here in this at my apartment here is archive 31, and it has files going back to 2008. And here's one of them. Plays just fine. So a lot of people will tell you don't put stuff on spinning drives, and for multiple generations I wouldn't. But that's from 2008. So that's, what is that? 16 years? Is that 16? Am I doing the math right? And I was doing a video for the fruit company down there once. And it was when they made their big hard drive thing. And I told the guy how I archive stuff, the Apple employee, like in between takes, we were just chatting, and he looked at me and he said, "You're stupid." Like, just flat out, he just told me I was stupid for doing what I do. And I'm like, well, okay, but I can't afford your, bazinga dollar drive, and these drives cost me $99, and I'm still here 16 years ago, and they don't make that drive anymore. So I rest my case.
That is a good point. Yeah, I think that I did something the way we kept our drives at Pixelcore was very similar to Chris's, which is that we would make 2 copies, so 2 spinning drives of everything that we did, and we would scan them so that we had and then we put them in a box and put them away and just keep them there. The funny thing is that I'm still getting requests about once a year for something that was, 10 years ago or 12 years ago. And what's interesting is, as long as Pixelcore existed, we had all of that. You could ask us for anything. Well, we in our SOW, we would list 30 days. We have it for 30 days. So we would never tell you that we kept it. We would say we will always delete it on your request, but we don't guarantee more than 30 days, because I just didn't want to be accountable for it. I didn't want someone to think that, and we would usually deliver anything that we had delivery drives. So we would deliver the drives. One of the little weird things in California, and I don't know if there's a lot of drama around this. We were told by a fairly large company, we'll say Fortune 5 company, that if you deliver a drive and you give it if you do a project and you give it to the client in California, it's considered a taxable event against the entire budget of the project. And so we would always put on our drives, please return to Pixelcore with our address. And now we would call you once, we would email you once, call you once, and then forget it. Like, and it was funny because another big company said, "You guys are really cheap. You always want your drives back." I'm like, "Oh, it's not that." Like, it's just like we were told to, by one big company that this is a taxable event if we give you the drives with the content on it. And but we would always deliver that back to them and then say we had it for 30 days, but we had all of it. And they would call a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later. And I can say at that time for that collection, there's probably 3,000 drives that were there, and we never lost a bit, in that entire time. Now, when we had an archivist, that was his only job. And one of the things that he would do is go through them. He had kind of a tickler system that, when he wasn't doing something else, just do a search on this drive. And all it did is just kept the heads clean. And so he would just slowly work through that library, probably get through it about every 6 months. Like that, it just turn the drive on, run a search, and then put it back. And anyway, so that was very effective. I will agree with Chris. It's funny. I would agree with Chris. I would never tell anyone to do that. So I think it's crazy, but it worked. And so anyway, so my reasonableness in my head is you should never do that. But I did it effectively for, 12 years, you know, and without any
Yeah.
issue. Now, when it comes to actually archiving this stuff, the one thing I would say is, again, if you're archiving tape, I'm always going to say, take it to someone. If it's been sitting for more than 5 years, you're going to take it to somebody and let them archive it. They need to potentially bake the tape. Don't like try it out. Like that's the worst. I have a tape right now that's like 30 years old, taking it somewhere, handing it to them, and let them try to recover what they can out of that videotape. It's home video, you know, with my brothers and my dad and stuff like that. I was like, oh, I don't think there's any other tape now that exists that has that on it. So, and this gets into why you want to do it. Um, one thing to think about is putting as much of the data. I think Adrian's suggestion is really good. Putting as much of the data in the file name as possible. So one of the things that we do, you know, when I was at ILM, one of the things we did, we had a ton of data that when we had a naming convention. So think about a naming convention, but don't think about it in real text. Create, you know, you have a key. Interesting is even if you lose the key, people will figure it out. Like if they had to dig through it, they'd figure out, oh, I see this key is connected to this and this person or whatever. So they'd be able to kind of suss it back out again. But you put a key in. Now, typically when I build naming conventions, the naming conventions never have the outside edge is 5 characters per section. And usually it's 4. It's 3 or 4. It's never 2, never more than 5, never 6. And so you have, you have your XXX underscore this 10 underscore this. And the other thing is that whatever that naming convention is, it's always the same for every section. And it goes from being the most general to the most specific this way. And I build them all out. No, the reason I do them, make sure that they're the same number of characters with underscores, is because I can run grep, I can run searches that go out 16 characters and look at the next 4 and tell me what that is. And, and so I can always, it's easy to find things if you're doing a very specific search for something that you're looking for. You're not just looking for this set of characters, but you're looking for this set of characters between at 13, 14, 15, 16 those are the ones that I want. And then look at those and then find them. And so we learn to kind of build that out. The other thing is, by the way, is when you look at it in a list, it's all nice. You've got little rows that go down and they all sort nicely. But put as much as you can into that. You got 200 in most operating systems. You have 256 characters minimum. Some of them have more, but use up 100 characters or 150 characters of data that's there, because you don't know. Sidecars are a much better way to hold a lot more data, but oftentimes sidecars that's the text file that Adrian was talking about. If someone's not careful, they get separated, especially if they go in and like if you tell iPhoto to go grab all the photos out of this folder and move it into iPhoto, all your sidecars are gone. It's just going to pull them all in. So thinking about those naming conventions, I think, helps a lot. And then again, if you, I am in the process of, I haven't done it yet. I'm fixing one of my printers. I have a really good Epson that I let get dry. So now I'm fixing it right now, but in the process, I am getting photographic grade film, and I'm collecting all these images that I'm going to use, and I'm going to print them back to archival quality, print all my images as in archival quality print film, and then I'm going to put them into plastic, and then I'm going to, put them somewhere cool. Now, and print lasts a long time. Hold on, I realized I had this here. It's amazing let's see, Star Wars. So this is, by the way, this is me, many, many years ago. This is probably now 35 years old, I think. 35 years ago, you can see me kind of hidden behind Sting, I think, with my big round glasses. 35 years in this format worked really well, and but it's in plastic, and it's been it's been kind of in a protected place, and I scanned it. But that's the power of film. So think about also the potential of printing those things out, printing them out, putting them back on film, things like that is something that, they still do that. Hollywood still does that. They'll take those movies that are all done digitally and they'll print them all back to film, and then put them into, and they'll print them out in the 3 in black and white. They'll print them out in the 3 channels as an archive to because they'll last the longest. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, just on that archiving, Alex, if you're going to do it with the plastic, I'd also recommend putting acid-free tissue between each of the plastic sheets and then putting them in an archive box. And making sure you've got a bunch of silica gels so that they don't get damaged.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I think it probably Lois is probably trying to archive some of her bird content, you know, for the bird watching stuff that she does. And I'll tell you, Lois, besides all of this, you know, tech stuff, I think what you really want to do is you want to make sure that you have some sort of a curator or a person to hand it off to. You know, Alex was showing his 30-year-old picture. 70 years ago, my father joined the U.S. Navy, and these are the letters that he wrote to his parents, my grandparents, while he was in the Navy. And when it was time, we had
where a format is old but not obsolete, and you want to have someone who's thinking about that. I mean, paper lasts a long time, but when you want to think about, like, when you're talking about digital, you know, put them in a format or a file folder structure that's pretty easy to grab onto for something that will process them again. So you have them all in ProRes or MP4 or whatever, knowing that there's going to be some point where they all have to get converted to whatever the new thing is, you know, somewhere in the future. And that, you know, just know that that may happen. But the key is, again, having it in two places. One in the cloud is a great, you know, two physical places. One in the cloud is a great way to know that that stuff is going to stay around for a while, especially if those two physical places is someone in the family. And if you put it in the cloud, just make sure that everybody has the password. Like, or enough, the people who, there's got to be a couple people with a password. You'd be surprised at how many upsets happen because someone's entire library is in the cloud. They die and there's nothing there's nowhere to get it out. You know, and sometimes they're able to with enough pushing, but it's difficult.
Speaking to what Alex is just saying there, well, one second, Chris. If you're going to put it in the cloud, put it into YouTube, unlisted, and then share those links with the family. So that is one way to have it in the cloud, have it access. They can access it on anything. Now, YouTube's probably not going away anywhere. You need to make sure that that account that they get uploaded doesn't get strikes against it or whatever. So that's the only thing. But you do, as what everyone here has said, is you do need a person who's like you're it, and they're the active archivist. Because you're right, as a format, you know, becomes obsolete but not unplayable, it does need to be actively archived again. So yeah, you're right. So there is a chain of human beings that need to be in this chain. As Chris has said with the letters from his father. And also you do need to have accessibility really easy to the people you want to get it. So unlisted on YouTube is a really nice way of having it free, having it 4K, having it yada, yada, yada. But just make sure, and probably you may even have two accounts. So if one account goes dead for whatever, because YouTube changes their, you know, whatever. So essentially, as soon as you find the next human being to pass it on to, get them to create a YouTube account of their name, and we'd simply have a double. So that you have everything that's on your YouTube account, then upload onto their YouTube account, and those kind of things can happen.
If you really care about it, remember that you can also take that file and print little images of do a Mybridge backup, which is just print little images of all the video. You can probably fit a second per page. So it's like 60 pages a minute. And just have, like, you know, if someone was committed, they could just scan it all and pull it all back in and realign it. And you have to put little registration marks on it so that people know how to.
Well, you can do a kinescope as well, which is printing onto film. So you can actually print a video onto film. So
the Mybridge technique. Now, one last idea, and this is a friend of mine, Stuart Chaffee, who is executive producer and owner of the show, The Computer Chronicles. When he decided he wanted to save the Computer Chronicles episodes in perpetuity, here's a life pro tip. He got himself a seat on the board. I think it was the president of the board of directors of archive.org, got them to archive all of his TV shows, and then he left archive.org. Not
well, you know, they're having a lot of trouble right now. Like I don't think they've lost anything.
Well,
but they've
it's
been
because Stuart left.
Badly. Yeah, but last week has been a hard time for archive.org. They've been getting a lot of attacks right now, but hopefully they'll be able to hang on to everything. Now let's go to the next question from Brody Hefner. Brody asks, I was excited to see the successful launch of the NASA Europa Clipper today. What systems does NASA use for reliable real-time communication among teams and geographically dispersed flight control centers? Go ahead, Carl.
So they do have their own comms system between centers. They have their own, of course, comms for actual missions and stuff as well. But what they have, like the thing that actually makes it work so well, is rehearsals. So what we don't see on the live stream is all the rehearsals they do. They did share one rehearsal, like a full 2-hour rehearsal video. So essentially, they recorded the rehearsal video. This was a few years ago for a similar kind of mission where SpaceX was the launcher, but it was a move on to the next segment. It's pretty cool to see these rehearsals. It is, a lot of it's scripted. So it's either a teleprompter or they've got it in their page. There are some experts that come in that do off the cuff, but these off the cuff ones, they already know the questions that are coming, and the cuff ones, they already know the questions that are coming. And why they actually had quite a big show was because the mission went that long, from launch or pre-launch to the launch to the second stage getting into orbit. And then we had to wait like, another half hour, 45 minutes. And then the second stage would then shoot it out of Earth's influence and it'll shoot it into the solar system. And that happened. And then it detaches from the SpaceX second stage. And then the spacecraft is on by itself. And then it turns on all its systems and it reports home, I'm happy, I'm healthy. And that covers 2.5 hours of show. So in all the gaps in between those energetic events, you could call them, they had enormous amount of outreach from all the NASA centers. So all the NASA centers around the United States got to actually have input into what kind of outreach they wanted and at what age level. So they had stuff for elementary school kids, they had stuff for high school kids, stuff at public outreach, so generally lifelong learners, at college level. So they had a lot of different segments that they can cut up later on and show. And this is actually NASA getting really good at this. And they've been doing this for quite a long time, to be honest. But essentially, they've got people there that really care about what's going out. Now, the communications is essentially a back-end communications, which we talk about comms here all the time, and you can put your name of comms system in there, and that's what they're using. And NASA has been doing comms since pretty much its birth back in 1957. But essentially, 1958. But essentially, it's going to be more about rehearsal and knowing when is it time to go to you. So you don't see too many centers talking between each other. That's not really how they want to do the show. It's more throwing from one center to another center, another NASA center. And then once the ball's in their court, they go with it. And they go with what they rehearsed. And they just have lots of different segments. But it's a really cool 2.5 hour video to watch. There's lots of stuff in there and lots of stuff about live production. So go and kind of dismantle any of those segments and figure out how they did it, from lighting, from microphone, from audio, from teleprompters. You can just take one of those segments, dismantle, you'll learn quite a lot. But if you do it for all of them, you'll understand there's like over 100 people working, simultaneously behind the scenes to have that 2.5 hour show work. It was quite good.
Yeah, I think that I'm glad that NASA's spending a little more energy on it. I think that for a while NASA wasn't doing anything, and I think that the bummer of that is that that's how you inspire the next generation. Is that having, taking people who are excited about seeing the thing and turning it into a classroom of this is how this all works. I think that SpaceX probably does it better than everybody else right now as far as doing some of that. I didn't actually get to see the stream from this last one, but a lot of camera angles came out later that were just stunning. And I think that that's inspiring and that gets people excited about what's happening. And I think that, when you're looking for funding the next time around, it helps that there's a lot of people that know why you're there and are excited about why you're there. And I think that NASA for a long time was kind of just depending on the networks to do all of that and not putting that kind of effort into it. Mickey said that they use RTS. I don't, we've interacted with them, but it's always been over a phone bridge. So when we do it, they just tie us into a phone bridge. You're absolutely right. Everything is very scripted out. And it's funny that, someone asked, like, we went into probably the third time we had done something with a space station. We went into the rehearsal and NASA would ask something and we would respond with the perfect response. And then they would ask something and our client was like, how do you know that? Like, how do you know what to say when they say the thing? And I'm like, because they say the same thing every single time. like we learn to write it down and put our script in front of us while they have their script in front of them. And it's all going to happen the way we all expect it to. And that made NASA comfortable. I think I've talked about this before, but NASA's, they speak very slowly and they never get excited. So when they go to, the first time we did it, they were like, space station, this is Houston. Do you read us? And then, but the astronauts are like that. They're like, Houston, this is space station. We read you loud and clear. And then they were like, Pixelcore, this is Houston. Do you read us? But no matter what's happening, that is the tone. And I once asked them what, I was like, like, it's just, you guys are amazing because you're so flat. And we modeled a lot of what we did at Pixelcore based on NASA and about how they are on comms. We'd have other people listen to it and go, that's the way we want you to be on comms. And they said, well, we found that that raising our voice did not improve the survivability of the event. So it was a funny response. But you know what? Did you know that how to know what comm system where someone came from? Have you heard how to figure that out? If someone is using RTS, they came from trucks. If someone is using ClearComm, they came from events. And if someone is using Readle, they came from money. So anyway, so expensive. All right, next question. Oh, that's me. Sorry. I was waiting for it to pop up. John Nichols is adding more detail to it. ProAV, he said early on it was a little skittish, technical term, at startup, e.g. mappings didn't save. I'm hoping this is fixed with the public beta. Also, is there a way to map people in Zoom ISO like with Companion, or is it all a UI at the moment? I actually don't know for sure. I know that we haven't had an issue where mappings. The funny thing is we may not know, and the reason for that is I don't usually save mappings. For what we do, I have to admit, it sounds like what you're doing is changing a lot of the mappings, and what I tend to do is send everything out. Like, so I get in, and my way of managing both Zoom ISO and other things is to really I do it manually every single time. I never assume that anything's the way I want it to be. So the idea of saving it, and the other thing that I don't do is remap things. So, the what you're talking about is just not my behavior with the products. And so it's an interesting thing to think about there. An interesting addition, which you probably saw, but just to outline it for folks watching, is the unique listener or unique speaker is a super powerful tool. So what that is send me whoever's speaking, except for the people that are already going out. So if I have 5 teachers or 3 teachers, and if I have 3 teachers, I'm putting them into a show. Let's say I have them on a show, but people in the class are asking questions. What I want is the audio or video from the active speaker. Like, because let's say there's 300 students. I can't, like, trying to find them really quickly could be a thing. Instead, what I want is just an active speaker minus the 3 people that I've already started pulling out. And that's what unique speaker is, which very cool feature. So it's interesting. It's because you're more advanced than I am that I don't I'm just like, part of my setup for a show is to manually go through and set everything exactly the way I want it out of ISO or ProAV. So it's an interesting, that's a different behavior. So we'll have to we'll keep on looking at that. I'll maybe ask somebody about that. Maybe ask that in the morning show, and then I'll see if I can find somebody that can answer that question more accurately. Next question is from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. And Paul asks, is the Tamron 17 to 70 2.8 at $754.92 a great all-around lens for the Sony ZV series blogger cameras for studio use? And he has a link to it. Go ahead, Carl.
Yes, this is a really good lens. So this is part of Tamron. So if Canon have L series, if you know what that means, this is part of Tamron's L series. Let's just say that. You can convert that how you want. So $699 on B&H at the moment. It's an APS-C lens, which means it will work with the ZV-10, ZV-N2, ZV-1 in crop mode. So it's great for those. I think this is a good match for price for that camera and the quality of that camera. Because you can spend way too much on a lens and you're never going to, because it's only got to do 2K or 4K. So it's only got to resolve 8 megapixels maximum if you're using it for video. People kind of forget this about lenses. It's not a 50 megapixel lens because it's never going to do that. It's only got to resolve 8. But this lens is actually one of the highest spec lenses in their APS-C range. It's got a great zoom range, so it's like 24 to 105 kind of range when you convert the angle of view. But yeah, so you can get this on many mounts, but you're saying the Sony mount. But yeah, so I'd give 2 thumbs up for this lens, for that camera in like a studio setup where you do want a bit of variety as far as your angle of view. It's not of course it's not going to be it's not a powered zoom, so you don't have that, but that's okay. You don't need a powered zoom for most of these kind of setups anyway. But yeah, so for that price, yeah, because you're going to be spending like double that price if you're into like the actual G lenses or GM lenses from Sony themselves. for a similar 24 to 105 kind of range in that APS-C kind of Super 35 crop. But yeah, so 2 thumbs up for me for this lens.
And I think that the one thing to decide is what you're using it for. So is it something like this, like a web camera, or is it something that you are going to move around and use for a lot of other things? The one thing that I've kind of moved away from is using zoom lenses for my web camera. And the reason for that is that I decide what my system is. I figure out what that length should be. Now, sometimes I'll throw a zoom lens on to figure it out. But once I figured it out, I just buy a fixed lens. And the reason for that is that for the same price or less, I get a much faster lens. So, so for instance, this one's a little bit more expensive than what you have, which is this is a 35 millimeter. Now, I only buy full frame sensor because I always dream that whatever camera I'm using will eventually become full frame. And so as a result, I don't buy APS. And the reason for that is that I used to have APS cameras. I bought a bunch of lenses for them, and then I moved to a full frame, and none of those lenses work. And so as a result, I was like, I'm only buying full frame lenses. So it's just something to consider. Is to just buy full frame sensors and know that you're doing about approximately a 1.5x multiplier to it. So a 35 millimeter lens is really a 50, for what this is doing. And so just something to consider. Now, what I'm using on my lens here is a Sony. It's the 1.4 F series, so it's a little bit more, probably twice as expensive as the one that you're looking at. But the one that my wife uses on an EV Z10, which is what you have, is this one, and this is the FE 1.8 35, and this is, you can see I bought it last August, a year ago, and it's about the same price at $748 on Amazon, and it's a faster lens, so I can handle low light a little bit better, but more importantly, I can soften that background a little bit more than the 2.8, and I just found that with an APS sensor or a Super 35 / APS sensor, I found that I wanted the lens to be faster than 2.8 oftentimes, just to soften my background to where I wanted it. I wanted something a little bit faster than 2.8. So that's something to think about and most zoom lenses max out at, the vast majority max out at 2.8. And if they go faster than 2.8, they are the price of a car, think about, so if you're going to use it for a lot of other things, all my other cameras have zoom lenses on them. The most popular one is a 24 to 70, that's this one's a little bit different, a little wider than that, but typically 24 to 70 is the most popular one that we use for production. But then I have, I usually have a 100 to 4, like to me, you have a 16 to 35, 24 to 70, 70 to 200, 100 to 400 with a doubler. And that's most of what that's like 90. I'm renting anything I'm not using for that camera. like if that lens collection doesn't work, oftentimes, and then those are the zooms that I use. And then the fixed ones, if it's going to sit here all the time and you're going to figure it out, then those are the right numbers in my opinion. I do have a challenge because I'm moving my studio and I realize that I might not be as far away from the camera. So that's something else we got to think about, but we'll see. Next question is also from Paul Wallace. And Paul asks, corollary to Brody's question, how does NASA communicate with the craft going to Jupiter Moon Waterworld, Europa, I think. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So this is actually a really good question. So the way it actually happens is through the Deep Space Network. So this is live. This is called Deep Space Network now. You can just Google it. So right now, if I'm looking at this, Europa Clipper is sending signals to Canberra here in Australia. So we have Madrid in Spain, we have Goldstone in California, and we have Canberra, which is inside of New South Wales. So on the east coast of Australia, essentially. So Europa Clipper, which is number 36 down there, on number 36 antenna, you can see Europa Clipper is the initials above it. So it's actually sending signals to Canberra at the moment, but this will change depending on the rotation of the Earth. Goldstone at the moment is receiving signals from Voyager 1. So that's a very ancient spacecraft. It's sending signals to Voyager 1. Juno, which is currently at Jupiter, is sending signals into Madrid. It looks like the large, so you can see the left satellite dishes here are the large satellite dishes at each of these installations. And it looks like the one in Canberra is offline for maintenance for whatever reason. And it's not really needed at the moment. It looks like Madrid's handling that. And essentially these locations are about 120 degrees around, in longitude around the Earth. So that's kind of why these things are placed where they are. But essentially, so this is live. You can click on, so you can actually click on them. And so if I click on Europa Clipper, I click on this one, it'll show me over here. This is the angle it is, because I believe it just got handed over from Madrid. So it's right on the horizon at the moment for Australia. So this is the angle of the dish. So this is showing you the angle of the dish as well. But if we go to, let's say, Goldstone, let's say Voyager 1, click on that. This one is a little bit more, so it's nighttime, obviously. And if we go to Juno in Spain, what's the dish looking like there? So it's almost directly up. So this will also show you the orientation of the dish in relation to the horizon. So you know that Canberra recently probably just got handed the signal, and it probably came over from, I would say here, yeah, Europa Clipper. So it came over from Madrid. So Madrid would have had it, and then it's given it over to, most likely giving it over to Canberra, or vice versa. It could be going from Canberra, handing it back, depending on where it is in the, as far as in the sky, as far as that. If I'm looking here, it's looking northwest, kind of, that's the direction of it, and it's on the horizon, means that it's probably bouncing between Madrid and Canberra. But at the moment, it's Canberra. That's our receiving the signal. But this is how we do it, Paul. It's called Deep Space Network. It's not just NASA. NASA have, essentially, they are a partner in this entire program. Obviously, it's on, but ESA, JAXA, everyone uses it to report, to get signals to and from. As you can see, we have one here. Well, we have two here that are actually sending signals to. There we go. We just had another one turn on for Madrid. So Goldstone is sending signals as well as receiving. Some are just listening. So we're just listening to Europa Clipper at the moment because it's just being sent off. We don't have to send out any code. But some other ones we need to update their firmware. We need to send them signals to tell them what to do, where to point, that kind of stuff. But yeah, and this is great because you can actually click on the antenna. You can learn about the antenna. You can learn all about it, and then you'll get the name of them here. You get the name of the things, and you can actually get their pointing and everything. And then once you get their name, you can go to Wikipedia and find out a lot more about that mission. So yeah, everything's there.
And Brody pointed out that Veritasium has an 18-minute video on the Clipper technology. If you haven't watched Veritasium, get to it. There's about a year there for you to just sit around and watch TV and be smarter. I think it's one of the best channels on YouTube. Next question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. And Roscoe asks, what are the benefits to having a dedicated space to produce virtual gatherings such as Live Bash? Are there reasons to stay flexible by being mobile? Benefits oftentimes cost. Cost, quality, stability. Like those are the things when you start talking about studios. I spent a decade, pretty much 95% of everything we did was loaded in. I loaded into an event space. I loaded into a house. I loaded into a stadium, whatever that was, we loaded into it. What you pay for, you pay an enormous amount of money for me to load in. There's days and days and days of setup there oftentimes, or hours, or prep. All these other things happen. And every time you tear something down and put it back together, maybe it'll work. So you have to have, that's why you have extra time to make sure that everything's working the way it left the building. And sometimes all of your rentals are showing up at the venue and you have to figure it all out there, which is a kind of a disaster. Most of the stuff that we did, I would build everything in the shop. That was the big advantage of, people say like, why would you buy all Blackmagic stuff? I'm like, because by owning it, I had 30 switchers and 20 Teranexes and all these routers. And we would build every kit for the event, wire it up, test it in the studio, and then just roll it in as a case, and it all worked. So, but the problem is you can't do that all the time. Most people can't do that. And the issue is that now does that venue have the right power? Does it have all these other things? When you have almost anybody who does load-ins will tell you what they really want at the studio. Like what I want to do is I want to be able to build a control room, have everything tied in, and have breakouts at the stage, and all the, stage boxes and all the other stuff. And I just want to be able to, make it happen. And if you can get, there's a big investment to having all of that stuff. So the light part of this is that when you don't have any work, you're not paying rent. You're not amortizing all of that. You're not dealing with depreciation of all the materials that you have there. If you are relatively busy, and for many of these locations, 1 or 2 things a week, it pays off. The hard costs get paid off pretty quickly. And, you can decide how much staff you have on hand, but that starts to become a lot less expensive to operate. You're not renting equipment for every show. You're not loading it in. And also you can do fast turns. So you can do something different every day without having to load in and prep for that next thing because everything just works and it always works. And that type of thing. And so the danger of it is that you can get into a rut. You can start doing shows exactly the same way because that's the system starts to define the shows. So the advantage of rebuilding for all these things is that you keep on coming up with it. But if you build a flexible enough studio, I mean, the big thing with live bashes, I mean, they're making it for other people, is that for someone to be able to walk in and have all the hardware and all the audio and video and lighting all there for them, and all they got to do is turn it on and, you know, write a check for whatever that is, it's going to be less than them most likely renting a space and all that equipment. I mean, you know, and so there's a big advantage for people who want to do an event to not have to figure out who's going to do that and then go into a raw space. Huge advantages there. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I haven't done as much as Alex, but I will tell you this, Roscoe. I have done companies shows for. I'm checking a list right here. We'll call it Fortune 1 companies, where you go into, just double check on the market cap. Where you go in and they have sometimes beautiful rooms with all kinds of gear. I have never been involved in a production that just used the gear that was installed. Never, ever, once. There's always like, oh, and we also need and they patch stuff in and they bring in outside stuff. So,
and
it's just
for
thought.
a Fortune 1, these spaces don't necessarily make, you know, add up because of exactly what Chris said, or Fortune 10 or even Fortune 100. But when you start getting into the myriad of other, you know, whether it's an artist or smaller, you know, SMBs, small to medium sized businesses, all these other things, that's where this makes sense because they don't even know what's possible. Like they don't know what else they would want to add, you know, and oftentimes you may add things to it, but it doesn't mean that you, would, you may add things to it. Doesn't mean you don't use any of the stuff there, any of the infrastructure. I mean, knowing that you have a bunch of stuff, and we come in all the time and ignore everything that's in the studio. So like we would come in and go, you know, the problem is it has to be modern. And so, but there's some studios that we walked into that we added very little, you know, and that's because they had super modern fiber backbones. They had Dante. They had, you know, they were running fire, you know, all, you know, you could drop in 4K 60 and, you know, everything was all built into it. Usually they were always built within the last 2 years. And so we tell everybody now when they're building buildings, build them, just put fiber, put a minimum of TAC 12 into every room except for the bathrooms. And think about those. Well, but every room other than the bathrooms put TAC 12 in minimum. And for the ones that you think you're going to do video, try thinking about 48 strands of glass going in and out of those to some kind of MPO where you can kind of cross connect all of that stuff, because you're eventually going to want to use that room for something, and you're going to wish that you had signal, and you won't, you know, and now you're running stuff down the hallway. And so and there have been some organizations that have done that. And what's interesting is what they oftentimes do is they'll run the cable out, and you think you're going to put a patch panel in. They don't do that. They run it out to a some kind of connector, and that can be a set series. Just sometimes it's just hanging. It'll be a TAC 12, and it's got a bunch of ST connectors just hanging on it. And then what happens is they have boxes that are currently defined for what they need. They plug all those things in, and then it gives them audio and multiple videos and everything else that they want to do, video returns. The reason they don't build it into the wall is because they can change that box anytime without having to get permits. so they just drop these little lunch boxes down and connect everything. So it's just things to think about as you, but again, studios are kind of amazing, especially if you can get volume. That's where it really starts to pay off, is if you're doing something every week, every day, even a couple times a month, a studio will pay itself off really fast. If you have it clearly defined of what it needs to do, and you then build. The key with studios, you know, we always say you should be 40 to 60% capacity. The key is to build a studio at 20%. Like what you need today is 20% of what you're building into that studio. You know, you got a huge amount of overhead of headroom in the studio so that you can grow into it. That's what people usually what they do is they build it at 80, 90, 100%, and then they have nowhere to go. Next question is from Mark Giuliani in DC. And Mark said, we are building a trailer to run 2 75-inch video monitors running ads for local businesses during the holiday parades. Monitors will be fed by an iMac and Keynote. Don't want noise from the generator. Think about battery power station. What are your suggestions? Go ahead, Chris.
First of all, Mark, I've done parades. I've done tech for parades, and honestly, generator is probably not going to be an objectionable amount of power. But if you're really concerned, I would look into some of the pre-built systems like Jackery and is it Renology makes one? I don't know. I was just looking at it. There's plenty of them. You just got to do the math, how many gigawatts you need and do that. I actually, with the help of Keenan, I actually built one myself from scratch, which was kind of fun. But a Renology or a Jackery is probably going to do it. But honestly, the noise probably won't be a problem.
Good, Carl.
Yeah, same as Chris. I don't think noise from a modern small generator will be a problem. But yeah, so EcoFlow is another one. So essentially just getting the right size one for, you're running 275, so you want to take a look at, essentially the specifications for those televisions, find out what their maximum power usage is, find out how many hours you're going to run that television, times that by 2. That's the number you're looking for watt hours from a battery pack. Jackery, of course, is more common in America. EcoFlow being a German brand, maybe a tiny bit more expensive than Jackery, I'm guessing, but pretty much insert brand here of battery pack that suits your needs.
Anchor is the other company I was thinking of. And just while I was Googling, I noticed that DeWalt makes a 4-bank charger. A lot of people own DeWalt tools. A 4-bank charger that will charge 4 batteries simultaneously, but it also has AC out. So if you fill it with 4 batteries, it turns into a power station as well. Kind of interesting. A little costly, but interesting.
Yeah, we had one a couple years ago, and what we did is we did have the battery packs, and I don't remember what the capacity was. I just knew that they cost $2,000 each. So they were a battery pack, and they were I don't even remember the brand because someone else got them for us, but they were tied in with solar dishes, and so we had a solar dish on the roof of the trailer we were using. It doesn't necessarily, it depends on what the weather's like, but it can slow down their burn rate. And then as a backup, which we ended up not using, we had a Honda 2000, and the Honda 2000 specifically is really small and really quiet. Like, so if you think about a generator being really loud, a Honda will absolutely run 2 monitors. It ran our entire production. We used to use these Honda 2000s all the time, and I think I owned 2 or 3 of them. And they're very quiet. They're designed to be like next to your
RV
thing, RV or whatever. And so they just don't make a lot of noise. And so we had that. You could probably get away with that generator by itself, and you probably wouldn't, to Chris's point, in a parade. I don't think anyone would hear it. And when you go to a farmer's market, if you ever go to farmer's markets, like, half of those things are running on these little 2000s, except for California. They don't let you do that anymore. So anyway, so those little 2000s are really popular and really quiet. But I would look at these, and again, this was for an event that was like 2 hours long. And so we were way overkill. We were just worried about it because we were completely unconnected. So we wanted to have solar to slow things down, a battery, relatively good batteries, but not going crazy. Now you can definitely get, sun power, there's a bunch of generators you can get that can run a lot. But these are all relatively quiet, and that we felt like we could be within 30 feet of the production, and at any level, it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. Next question is from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. And Paul asks, what's a good, reliable, but not super expensive color printer? Is the tank type the way to go? Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so tank type is the way to go unless you're going to the Pro Ends, and those Pro Ends, their ink is actually much larger than a tank anyway. But so I'm going to talk like A4, like US letter kind of size, A3 as well. So the one I own is the one on the right in this picture. So I own the Canon. So these are photo printers. So this is a 6 color ink. So I'll talk about the Canon first. 6 color ink. It has black, gray, cyan, magenta, yellow, and red. So it's a photo printer. So essentially, for photo printers, you're looking at 2 things, really. You're looking at a gray, and you're looking at either a photo magenta and a photo cyan, or you're looking at another color In this case, it's going to be red. Some have orange as well, but that's more for graphics. On the Epson side, no, that's $250 for the Canon, $500 for the Epson, which I think is overpriced, but I know that the Canon had a price drop. They're trying to be competitive. These are the only two, by the way. So these are the only two tank type printers that do photos. Now, I won't suggest any 4-color printer ever, because if you want to do a photo on 4-color, it's going to look terrible. These can do 4 colors, of course, and you can buy the bottles individually. So if you just want to run these in 4-color mode, you can. But so the Epson is a little bit different. It has 2 different blacks. One is for text and one is for photos. So even though it's a 6-color printer, really only 5 of those colors are going to be used for photos. And it has cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and gray. So it doesn't have the red. The reason why the red is in the Canon is because our skin tone is predominantly red. So it's actually designed for human skin tones to produce them much better, because trying to produce human skin tones from magenta and yellow can get kind of weird. So that's why they have the red. You can get more, you can go up in price. So the Epson here is $500 US, Canon is $250. There's a A3 version or a 12-inch wide version of the Epson, which is $700. So they don't make it, well, they do make an A3 version of the Canon, but it uses different inks, we're going in a whole different world here, and it's at different prices as well. We're well above 500. But yeah, so these are the two I would suggest for A4 size printing. They'll do photo printers. They can handle both photo stocks. So Canon photo stock can go on either, and Epson photo stock can go on either. If you're doing large prints of like thousands of thousands, so the Canon one, the ink you get with it, you can do over 3,000 photos with the ink it comes with it. So for $250, you can do over 3,000 photos before you run out of ink for photo printing on a 6x4, so postcard size. And then the ink for these are like, I think about $20 per color. And they come in bottles, so they look like little 50, 60 ml bottles. And that's it. It has changed. Like, it's about 100 times cheaper for me to run this than to run a conventional Canon printer, and I'm talking from experience. So it's 100 times cheaper. The Epson is pretty much the same. Cost is the same as far as the inks. Ink size bottles are roughly the same. Give or take a few mils. I find that the Epson one, which I did test out, because I was, I'm doing my homework because I knew I was going to be doing thousands of photos through these machines. The Canon one, because of the red. Once you add another color, 2 blacks is great, but only 1 black can be used during printing. So once you add another color, it's much better for people, and most of my photography is people photography. So when people say they want prints, rather than me going out to another service, I can buy 400, blank stock of prints for $20. So 400 sheets of postcard size prints for $20, and then I can print them off in this, and it costs me about 3 to 4 cents, probably about 2 to 3 cents in US dollars per print. That's it. So these are 2 I'd suggest. If you want to go larger, if you want to have 12 inks, then we're going to a whole different system. But I would suggest these 2 for $250 and $500 respectively.
And the one that I have is the equivalent of probably what currently would be a P800, and when it dries out, you feel really bad. So if you're going to keep printing, you want to keep printing. We'll see if the problem I have is confidence that once I fix it, is it really going to work? Because it's cleaning the head. You have to basically disassemble the printer and put it together. So I'm trying to figure out what's next, but I really want to have something that is, I got to tell you, when it was working, magical. Like, it was just the best. I mean, it was the best prints I've ever printed from anything. So that's the hard part for me, is to go to something else, because that one worked so well. So next question is from Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York. And Henry asks, for signal flow drawings, do you start with video, audio, or LAN? And he's at a hint, second hour. So anyway, go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, definitely a second hour. You could talk on this 4 hours. I always start with a physical, work from the LAN and work my way up. And the other tip for diagrams like that, I like to put the bandwidth and the PoE budget at each level, so that you can see as you're going across where you might actually run into trouble.
Carl?
So the physical layout of everything. So the first thing you want to do is you want to put everything relative to everything to where it's going to be physically located. So obviously, let's say you're working in a single room and you need everything in that one room. It makes it a little bit easier because you can just have cables go. But if you have different things located in different rooms, then make sure you actually do put everything you need to hook up, all the physical hardware you need to hook up. And if you're going, this is going to the cloud, let's not go onto the cloud by fairies. It needs to go via an ISP. So where is your ingest to that ISP, be it an Ethernet socket on a wall, be it your own, 4G, 5G. Where is that 4G, 5G going to live? Is it going to run off battery power? Does it need wall power? So you really got to think about physically where you're going to have outputs for power for everything you need. Once you have like the physical locations of everything done, then you can start routing between them, the video, the audio, the data, all that kind of stuff. But get the actual physical layout in the room of something done. Now, if you're in the cloud, then that's a little bit different. So if you're doing everything in the cloud, then it can just be a matrix of things. But actually in the cloud, you still have machines. So you'll still have these physical machines you're running on. You may not be running your entire production on one machine sitting in some Amazon rack. So you may actually have multiple machines handling different things. So you'd also have to think about what has to go from one machine to another, and the sending software on one machine and the receiving software on another machine. So there is a little bit more in the cloud as well. But as far as in the physical space, which I'll stick to, where is everything going? Where are the power outputs? Where are the outputs to ISPs? Are you your own ISP? Are you going to be getting your own stuff out? Think about, also, another thing actually to think about is where is the sun going to be during the event, and is your equipment going to be sitting in the sun? So you may have sun coming in through a window, it's not there when you set up, but by the end of the day, and you've got your last session going on, and the sun's streaming in, hitting all your equipment, and it's in full sunlight, and you can't really shade it because you're in the middle of production and you've got no hands free. So think about where the sun's going to be as far as your location as well. So a little bit of weather, think about weather as the time changes throughout the day as well.
Yeah, I was trying to think of what I actually do. I mean, I think that this, Mickey said you start with power, and I think that Mickey's probably right. I just never do. So I always start with video because that's the most complicated thing for me to define. Usually is figuring out where all the cameras are going, what routers they're going through, and play out systems and how it. So I usually start with that. I do keep them on all separate layers. So I have the video. Oftentimes, what I'll do is I have layers that are transparent on top of each other in something like OmniGraffle. So I do my video, then I do my audio, then I do my Ethernet, and then I do a power. Because for me, power is the last thing I do because now I know where all my equipment is. Like it doesn't help me to do power until I know what my draws are and where they are and what box they're going to be in and everything else. Then I can draw power and figure out those bits and pieces. So that's how I approach that. Next question is from Robert Soji in Los Angeles. And Robert asks, is there any advantage to buying APS-C lens for an APS-C camera or buying a full frame lens for an APS-C camera? Go ahead, Carl.
So the advantage of buying an APS-C lens for an APS-C camera is cost generally. The other reason so putting a full frame lens on an APS-C camera, the MTF is going to look worse. So you'll have a softer image, low contrast image. So all that light is going to the camera, but only a small portion of it is actually hitting the sensor, which means the other light's not disappearing. It's getting bounced all around inside, and it will actually hit the other sensors, essentially make it low contrast. This is not a big issue because we have sliders that can just go, just change the black levels. So that's not a big issue, but technically, yes, it will make your images softer. It essentially adds light pollution. Technically, they're less sharp. This is what I'm talking about, the optical. So if you're only seeing the center of the image and the center of the image is still seeing 8K, 4K, so I'll keep it to video. So it doesn't matter which size sensor you're going to, you only need 8K, let's say 4K. So it's 8 megapixel. So it doesn't matter. So just because you're on a smaller sensor or a large sensor, it's still 8 megapixel. That's all you need. So if you're only dealing with 8 megapixel, seeing 8 megapixel through a narrower portion of the glass will be blurrier. Because if you go smaller and smaller and smaller, because the glass is going to diffract itself. The glass isn't perfect. So the less of the glass you look through, essentially the more narrow. So essentially if you essentially zoom in, so make a sensor tiny. So if you put like a 1/3 inch sensor on a full frame lens, it'll look really blurry because that glass can't resolve that. When they engineered the glass to be the full frame width. So it's engineered to have the resolution on the full, what we call image circle. So if you're putting, let's say you need a 4K image or 8 megapixel from that full image circle, then the glass can do that. And this is the coatings. This has to do with, there's a lot of technical reasons, but usually cost. Now, if you own both systems, yes, you marry the lens, you date the camera. So if you own both systems, as in full frame and APS-C, then just get full frame. For most of the stuff you can. Kit lenses are fine. Kit lenses are fine to teach people as well. So you want to think about teaching people. You don't want to give them like $3,000 lenses to teach someone on. But generally, if you're only in APS-C world and you don't intend to go up to a full frame world, or you're only in Super 35 world, that's another way of saying it, and you don't intend to go to full frame video workflow because your cameras are just for work, and work, this is good enough for what your clients need, then stick with Super 35 or APS-C lenses. You'll just save money and invest the rest of the money in lighting. Lighting will make your image look better regardless of using an iPhone. It doesn't matter what you're using. Lighting is the key to make something look good. not lenses. Unfortunately, it's hard to explain that to people, but lighting is the difference. Like Apple's presentations they've been doing recently, yes, the iPhone is being used, but what you don't see, and we do see with some of the behind the scenes shots, is the hundreds of thousands of dollars of lights they actually have, especially for that first one they did. They've switched lighting providers for the last one they did. So they have a new lighting system for the most recent video they did, which was more of a daylight fitness one where they're outdoors a lot. The very first one they did at night intentionally, because they wanted to essentially be in a studio. They want to control all the lighting. That's why the very first one was like that. But they now have a new lighting provider. I won't go into that, but there are new types of lights because they've come on the market since that first video was done in the dark with the M3 launch, I believe it was for them. And this new light, which is being used quite heavily in the Bay Area. So there's a few people on YouTube who work in essentially all the DPs or gaffers in the Bay Area all know each other. And they do these kind of podcasts together. And they're all saying, yeah, I just did this job for this big company and we just use exclusively these lights. So they're kind of telling us in a way, and we're seeing some photos from behind the scenes of these events. But yeah, lighting is way more important than the lens. So save money on lens, and if you're only using APS-C, if you don't have any full frame cameras in your kit, if you do have all of your APS-C, but a client asks, hey, can we do this full frame? Just rent. Just rent. You know, that's kind of be the way. If you got a client ask you, say, not a problem, this is the price for it. If it's for your personal thing and you personally own both, then just buy whatever you can afford. You know, I would suggest a high-powered zoom lens, go APS-C, you know, because you'll actually get more bang for the buck. And then for, I think nearly all, well, not all, actually, it's not true, but a lot of prime lenses definitely go full frame. Because actually, they, you know, just if you're going to go full frame with prime lenses, that's kind of where you want to sit. And this is regardless of using it on Super 35 or if you're on full frame. But the reason why full, so I'm going to rewind a little bit. The reason why full frame is so popular is because it has the most lens selection out of any format ever made in the last 150 years. Full stop. There are more lenses at more combinations of focal length and aperture for full frame than anything else. And this is why full frame is considered king. It's not because of the format of the size of the sensor. It's because of the amount of lenses that are available for it. It's kind of like going into a rental shop and you're only going to have, well, you've got 3 lenses for this system, but you've got 300 lenses for this system. That's kind of the difference we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. And because full frame lenses work on other sensors, and that's the reason why people use them, because there's just so much variety. You can't get an equivalent to a 200 millimeter f1.8 on any other system but full frame. So that's kind of the knowledge here is the reason why a lot of people get confused and think it's actually the sensor. It's not. It's the lenses, and the full frame lens mount has been around so long, and the lens formulas, in other words, aperture and focal length, all those combinations, there are way more for full frame than any other lens system, and there will always be more for full frame because all those lenses made back in the 50s and 60s still work today. So it's only accumulating, and it goes up and up and up and up. And as manufacturers like Blackmagic introduce cameras that just focus on video that do a full frame, more manufacturers that make lenses will continue to make more full frame lenses. So full frame is good. It's a little bit more expensive, but if you're in Super 35 world, don't rent full frame when you need it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, Carl wrapped it up completely. The only other consideration that you may have, depending on your use case, is the weight. The APS-C lenses are going to be significantly lighter than a full frame. So if it's something that you're thinking of stringing under a drone or putting it behind a hoop in a basketball arena or something like that, you may want to consider the weight. That's all.
Yeah, most manufacturers appear to be moving more and more towards full frame, which makes me more resistant to buying anything that's smaller than that, just because everybody, if you look at where they're building their cameras towards, everyone's building towards full frame. So if you buy a camera, it may have a limited shelf life. And again, as Carl said, you date the camera, you marry the lenses. And so, you know, your lens systems become a really important thing. Like I have a dual lens system now because I have Sonys and Canons, and it's, you know, it's like, oh, like there's a lot of money tied up in this glass. And so my resistance was mostly that I went from an APS to a full frame, and then I had a whole bunch of lenses that were worthless. And so I have a tendency, regardless of some of the points that Carl made, is that I have a tendency not to buy anything other than full frame, just because I feel like there are times to use Super 35, and there are times to use even 2/3. There's no time to use smaller than 2/3, in case you're wondering. Like to me, there's no version of the world that is smaller than 2/3 inch chip. You know, in 2/3 inch chip, still kind of
iPhone's larger than 2/3, Chris.
Yeah, the iPhone's larger than 2/3. So so there's here's the funny thing is that like we still kind of make fun of the 2/3 inch chips. The only time we use them is long lenses. So when we shoot more than 75 feet, we switch to 2/3 inch chips because you can't keep focus. We have a hard time keeping focus, in larger chips at that after we go to 75 feet. But anything under 75 feet, which I tend not to do any productions with. I don't tend to work on productions with throws that are longer than 75 feet, partially by choice. Like I talk the client into usually ignoring the audience and giving me seat kills. Like I want, and so usually there's a whole lot of like explaining why it's worthless to be in the back of the room, and working my way up to at least 75 feet in, which is still 20 rows, or 15 rows into the things. So you still have some people in the front row that don't have a camera in front of them, and then after that we put a monitor behind us, our big LED wall or monitor above us, and then so we don't have to necessarily kill that many seats, but we try to get within 75 feet of the stage. And usually I'm less than 30. Like that's kind of the world that I live in. Thank you so much to the panelists for joining us for this evening discussion. Slower, more, we kind of work through it and talk a little bit more than we do in the morning. But we really appreciate the panelists coming. I think Adrian and Chris were, they jumped right in. There was some openings, and so they were able to jump in. Thanks so much for doing that. And Carl, it's always good to see you. So thank you so much. We can't do this without you. And thanks to to everyone who asked questions at the beginning of the show. I was like, oh, this might be a really short show. I always have this problem with I go into it like this is going to be a short show because we're not having any questions. But producers came up to speed and made and brought us a lot of great questions that got us right to 7:30. So that was fantastic. And thanks to the incredible folks on the back end that are making this work, that are figuring this out. We're all doing it in the cloud. We did have some. We had some skipping today. We don't know why. We're doing research on it. So we don't know whether it was our encode into YouTube or YouTube's platform. We do have feelers out to try to find out what happened there, but we'll do some more research. We saw your comments. I saw some buffering here as well. We don't see that very often, so we don't know why. And so we'll take a look at it and we'll let you know probably, maybe next week. If you bring up the question, like, did you figure out what happened? We may know. So we're taking a look at that. So thanks to the team that puts that together. And do we have, I don't think we do a claw reversal on Thursday nights. So yeah, we don't know. We don't know how far we would have traveled, but it was long. It was long. It was far. So anyway, all right. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next week.